Woe unto him who distorts the law or the idea of perfection which serves as a model, who makes them out to be chimerical, and who already accommodates his rule to the evils he finds in front of him. Immanuel Kant. In my previous lecture, I addressed the common criticism of Kant's theory of morality, or rather specifically of Kant's moral rigorism. The common criticism that Kant is too strict, that he demands too much, that such a morality is a morality for angels, not for human beings, that this is dreamlike idealism, it's not realistic that we ever be that moral. And in that last lecture, I mainly focused on how dishonest that sort of criticism is, how those sort of critics, they may claim that it is not possible, that it can't be done to follow this morality, but what they really mean is they don't want to. What they really mean is this morality can't be followed if we want everything to stay as it is, if we want to keep up the status quo, if we want to keep up our life as it is, our lazy, maybe pleasurable, maybe luxurious life as it is, then we cannot follow this morality. We want a morality that is easy to follow, even while you are being immoral. But now, in this lecture, I want to talk about this in a more positive manner. Not just negatively rejecting this criticism, but rather pointing out why this rigorism of Kant is not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing. It's very much needed in morality. And let us start this by thinking of the perfect human being. Think of not a real person, but the best possible person you could think of. Someone who was truly good, truly and fully morally good, holy even. The human being not as he is, but as he should be. Now, if you believe in a God, then this ideal human being that you just talked of, you must think that he was also sought by God when God created the humans. That this ideal was the archetype that God had in his mind, so to say. And according to this archetype, he shaped the actual humans when he created them, wanting them to be like this. Which is why Kant calls this thought, this perfect human being, the ideal of the God-pleasing humanity, or the ideal of the humanity that is agreeable to God. Again, this is the human being as he should be. And of this ideal of the God-pleasing humanity, this archetype that God had in his mind when creating humans, you could very well say that this is the image of God. This is what it means when we say God created humans in his image. Obviously, it's not the specific individuals in the sensual world that are created in the image of God. Like, God doesn't look like a human being. That would be anthropomorphism. And it would lead to the question, who looks most like God? Like, does God have brown hair or blonde hair or red hair or whatever? We don't know. But rather, when we say God created humans in his image, it must refer to humans being rational, autonomous beings who are therefore capable of giving themselves a moral law and following it. And it is the holy human being who is truly in God's image, who is as good as God is, who is not doing his own selfish will, so to say, but doing the will of God. So it is he who is created in God's image. So, of course, you would also be justified in another way to say that our idea of God is created in our human image. That is, once again, not in the image of the specific individual central human beings, but rather in the image of this ideal human being. Like, we imagine the perfect, holy human being, and then we take this and once again we strip anything that is human, anything that is finite away from it, like the body, the psyche, all the limitations, and what we are left with is this, so to say, pure holiness, and we have our idea of God. So we could just as well say that God is created in the image of humanity, as we can say that humanity is created in the image of God. Also, this ideal of the God-pleasing humanity, which once again must have been the archetype that God had in mind when creating humans, this could also be called the Son of God, that was with him from the beginning. Because in God there's no change, right? Otherwise he would not be the perfect eternal being. Otherwise he would have to be influenced by something, and he would be in time, right? He would therefore be essential. So in God there's no change. Therefore, if he has this ideal in his mind, he had it in his mind from the beginning, as far as we can even talk about the beginning when it comes to God. Therefore, this could be called the true Son of God. Now, if you are a Christ, you will believe that the historical person, the historical individual, Jesus of Nazareth, that he lived up to this ideal of the God-pleasing humanity, that he, in that sense, was the Son of God. And Kant does believe that, but he also stresses that it is not necessary, neither for morality, nor, as I will explain further when I get to Kant's philosophy of religion in the next year, nor even for religion is it necessary to believe in any specific historical facts, like believe that God gave the law to Moses on Mount Sinai, believe that God made Muhammad his prophet, or believe in this case that Jesus was the Son of God. That is not important for morality or for religion to Kant. So you may or you may not believe in that. What is important is that you have in your mind this ideal of the God well-pleasing humanity. Whether you believe that anyone ever lived up to that ideal, and whether you believe that if someone lived up to that ideal, it was Jesus of all people, that is secondary. What is important is that this ideal to God, it must have served as an archetype, as, so to say, the model after which he shaped human beings. For us, however, it must serve more as a prototype, as a model after which we shape ourselves, as an example. Because this is what morality is about, right? We should have in mind this ideal of humanity as it should be, and then we should mold ourselves according to this ideal. We should try to live up to this ideal. As Kant says, morality is all about living according to the idea through which we first came into being. And in this sense, it is actually quite right when some Christians like to ask the question, what would Jesus do? As long as you take this seriously, and as long as you understand it in the right way, that is not the specific historical individual Jesus, who may or may not have been the perfectly moral, holy human being, but rather this ideal that I have through my reason in my own head, which I believe Jesus to have to lift up to, but rather, what would this ideal human being do? In other words, what should be done here? What is my moral duty to do in this case? And to Kant, it is the great merit of Christendom to first have found and expressed this ideal of holiness. Here Kant criticizes the philosophy of the ancients. In general, he holds the ancients in high regard. Especially the ancient Greeks accomplished a lot in philosophy, Kant says. And he says there is nothing better and nothing more instructive in their philosophy than their practical philosophy. And particularly, he is impressed by the fact that so early on in the history of philosophy, in the history of human thought, so early on, they already managed to try any possible solution, any possible route there is in practical philosophy, except the one of holiness. But this is the one criticism he has, that their goodness is never holiness. They had no concept of the true purity of the heart. Rather, their goodness, even the one of the Stoics, is at best wisdom and virtue. And virtue to Kant, I already addressed that in the lecture on the radical evil. Virtue to Kant means strength to rule yourself and to fight down your own sensual drives. But holiness, the true purity of heart, would not even need such a strength. To Kant, when you have any sort of practical philosophy, so philosophy that is about action, about what you should do, you need to have some sort of ideal, some sort of image of where do you want to get to, how do you want to act. And the various ancient schools of philosophy had different ideals of what the human being should be like, and they also usually had someone in mind who, according to them, actually lived up to that ideal and exemplified it. Usually that would be Socrates as the perfect sage. And Kant describes 4 possible ideals that the ancients tried out, but that all in one way or another fall short. And I don't want to go too deep into explaining all of this, because then I would have to explain the various ancient schools of practical philosophy, and then I would go completely off topic. This would stop being a Kant lecture. I do want to get into talking about other philosophers sometime in the future, but right now I want to stick to Kant. But still, I will give an overview of how Kant describes these ideals. So, first off, he says there is the ideal of nature. That is the ideal that the perfect human being is he who lives according to nature. And that would be the König ideal. So the Königal school, in the ancient times, the most famous follower of that school, or also somewhat its founder, is of course Diogenes, known for being a cynic and also for being basically the first troll of history. And Diogenes famously tried to live a completely simple, completely natural life, so to say, outside of society and outside of any sort of technology. Like there's this famous anecdote that he owned nothing except a cup for drinking, and then one day when he saw a child drinking from some water out of his hand, he also threw that cup away and basically said, what a fool I was to burden myself with this cup when nature already gave me the best possible cup. And according to this practical philosophy, the natural human basically is good already. We don't need to work on ourselves. We don't need to cultivate ourselves to become good. Rather, we are good. The only thing we can become is bad, and that is through society. Society basically perverts our nature. Society creates all sort of unnatural drives or desires. Like with society, you have envy. You see that someone else has something that maybe you don't really need and would never have wanted if you had lived on a lone island, but now since someone else has it, you also want it. And society creates all sort of unnatural desires of luxury. Now you are not content anymore with just having a full belly, with just having bread, let's say. No, now you need some special food, some more expensive food. You need to eat at good restaurants. So all the vices and all the evil really come out of society perverting the natural human being. So we need to go back to nature. And Kant says that this is not just an ancient school, that in his day, in the 18th century, a sort of modern König would be Rousseau. So, of course, he's a more, let's say, more refined, more cultivated König, not as rough on the edges, let's say, as Diogenes was, but basically the same. He basically has the same philosophy of saying man is good by nature. It is society that perverts him. We need to go back to nature. The second ideal would be the ideal of prudence, and that is the ideal of the Epicureans. Now, Epicurus was a proponent of a sort of hedonism, saying what really matters in life, what we should really strive for, is our happiness. But it was not a primitive, short-sighted, completely selfish hedonism as the cliche that maybe might come up when you think of hedonism would say, but rather it was a smart or a prudent hedonism, right? Basically, this philosophy would say you are not happy when you follow any possible drive and desire. You are not happy when you, let's say, get drunk and then the next morning wake up with a headache. You are not happy when, let's say, you sleep around and then end up with AIDS or whatever. Rather, the best thing is to have as little desires as possible. And the best thing is to be content with as little as possible. Epicurus famously said he could be content with just a bit of bread and cheese. If you don't need any fancy food to be content, then you can lead a happy life eating your bread and cheese every day, and maybe one day you get invited by someone and he offers you fancy food, and then you can enjoy that and be happy about the treat. But you can also be happy the next day when you go back to your bread and cheese. But if you need luxury, if you need the fancy food, for example, for your happiness, then as soon as you can't have it one day because maybe you don't have enough money for it every day, or maybe there's a shortage there because of a drought or whatever, then you will be unhappy now. So the best thing is moderation. The best thing is temperance. And therefore, the Epicureans would probably not go quite as far as the Cynics. They will probably not say you need to go back to nature altogether, but they would agree that with society come many unnatural and unhealthy drives and desires, and that we should be careful not to go there, not to let our desires be perverted in that way. And this prudent life would, according to the Epicureans, also be a virtuous life, because being virtuous, being good, doing what is morally right, being good to others, would also be the most prudent course of action. Selfishness is usually short-sighted, may give you some pleasure in the moment, but in the end, it will come back to bite you in the ass. Better for a happy life to be virtuous. The third ideal would be the one of the Stoics, and that is the ideal of wisdom, Kant says. To them, what mattered most was not happiness, but actually doing one's duty, being virtuous. And the wise person is he who focuses on what really matters, on what his reason says is his true vocation and calling, and what reason says should really happen and be done. And so the wisdom of the Stoics was about being virtuous, being good, and for that ruling your drives, ruling over your desires, if needed, suppressing your desires, because what matters is not your body and pleasure or pain it may feel, but what matters is your soul, and that you rule over your soul. And out of these ideals, Kant says, the first one, the ideal of nature, is, well, a natural ideal, because once again, it's just a negative one. It's just about not letting your nature be perverted, or if it already has been perverted, going back to the original natural state. While the other two, the Epicurean ideal of prudence and the Stoic ideal of wisdom, they are ideals of cultivation or of culture, Kant says. because they are positive ideals. The Epicureans and the Stoics would both agree that it is not enough that humans are not just fine as they are naturally, but rather that you have to work on yourself. They would disagree on how exactly to work on yourself, or with what goal work on yourself, on whether it is about prudence and your own happiness, and virtue is itself a means to achieve that happiness, or on the other hand, whether it is about wisdom and your virtue, and being wise and virtuous as a positive side effect will also lead to your happiness. But they would both agree that you need to cultivate yourself, not just to live according to nature. Now, all three of those ideals, however, Kant does call physical ideals, because all three of these philosophical schools basically stay in this world and focus on how you act, how you live your life here in this world. The fourth ideal Kant calls a hyperphysical ideal, and that is the Platonic ideal. It is the ideal of unifying, becoming one with the supersensual idea of goodness, or with the Godhead, Kant says. So here, this is not really so much about action, about how you act down here in this sensual life, but rather it is about a sort of rejection of this sensual world. It is about saying the true goodness is outside of this world, is the supersensual idea of goodness, and truly being good is not about living a good life, being virtuous, but rather it is about the union with that idea of goodness. And this Platonic ideal, Kant would say, has been the ideal of the mystics, right? Mysticism has often been described as being about the so-called unio mystica, so the mystical unity, the mystical unification with God, and letting go of yourself, melting away, so to say, into God and into the pure goodness, into the pure holiness. Kant would reject this ideal, of course, as a form of what he calls Schwärmerei, so raving, going beyond the bounds of reason, and he would also reject it as basically not being good, not doing your moral duty, not doing what you're here for in this world, but rather trying to run away from this world and to find some sort of bliss in your unity with God, while the rest of the world probably burns because you have done nothing to actually make it better. Those are the Cynical ideal of nature, the Epicurean ideal of prudence, the Stoic ideal of wisdom, and the Platonic ideal of the unity with the goodness. Those are, Kant would say, the four ideals that ancient practical philosophy came up with. And he also believes that those are all the ideals you can come up with, except for one that the ancients did not find, and that was only introduced into philosophy by Christendom. And that is, once again, the ideal of holiness, as exemplified in how we imagine Jesus. And again, Kant does appreciate the ancient philosophy. He has great appreciation for Epicurus, and he certainly was already in his youth very influenced by the Stoics, and he would say that the Stoics have a noble pride born out of the cognition of their own human dignity. But he criticizes a certain heroic kind of morality that can also be found in the Stoics, and he says about it, "It is nothing but moral fanaticism and exaggerated self-conceit that is infused into the mind by exhortation to actions as noble, sublime, and magnanimous, by which men are led into the delusion that it is not duty, that is, reverence for the law, whose yoke, an easy yoke indeed, because reason itself imposes it on us, they must bear, whether they like it or not, that constitutes the determining principle of their actions, and which always humbles them while they follow it, obey it, fancying that those actions are expected from them, not from duty, but as pure merit. For not only would they, in imitating such deeds from such a principle, not have fulfilled the spirit of the law in the least, which consists not in the legality of the action, without regard to principle, but in the subjection of the mind to the law, not only do they make the motives pathological, seated in sympathy or self-love, not moral in the law, but they produce in this way a vain, high-flying, fantastic way of thinking, flattering themselves with a spontaneous goodness of heart that needs neither spur nor bridle, for which no command is needed, and thereby forgetting their obligation, which they ought to think of rather than merit. To Kant, it is the great merit of Christendom, with this ideal of holiness, to have humbled righteousness and thereby made sure it doesn't become self-righteousness. So, if you ask why it is important for morality to be based on rigorism, this is one answer. The rigorism is what prevents arrogance and what creates humility in morality. If you have a moral law that is lenient, the ethica laxa, as Kant calls it, then you will always find yourself adequate to the law, right? Because the law doesn't demand much anyways. But if you have a strict and demanding moral law, you will always find yourself inadequate. You will never be able to allow yourself to feel like you're a good, a perfect human being, and you will stay humble. It is of course important to have the right sort of humbleness. And what is humility? It is in some way about feeling small and imperfect, right? But in order to feel small and imperfect, you need to compare yourself with something and realize that you don't reach that something. So the question is what to compare yourself with. And here it's important that Kant is not a proponent of what Nietzsche would call slave morality, and Kant is not for what he himself would describe as the virtue of monks. So this is not about some sort of Christian beating yourself up, saying, oh, I'm such a sinner, I'm the lowest of the low, all the other people, they are better than me. No, the other people are just as human as I am. So they cannot really be better than me. Kant would say that we should not compare ourselves with others in that way. All humans are equal in their worth. We should not feel lower than others. that would not improve our morality. Quite the opposite, it would impede our morality. If I tell myself that, oh, others are so much better than me and I'm such a bad person, this seems to be my nature, I'm so lowly, then I will not cultivate myself. I will not gather my strength, my energy to strive and become a better person, because I already told myself that I can't. No, rather, in comparison with other people, I should not be humble. I should rather tell myself, even when standing before the best person, the most moral person there is, I should always tell myself, well, he's just as human as I am. I have the same free will. So if he can do it, if he can be this moral, then so can I. I should not feel humbled by him. I should not feel dispirited. Rather, he should be a motivation for me. I should realize, oh, this is possible. You can be this good of a person, then I can be too. It is rather the moral law, and therefore, once again, it needs to be a strict moral law demanding holiness from us and nothing less. It is the moral law, not other human beings, with which we should compare ourselves. And here, in this comparison, we will always find ourselves inadequate. We will always find ourselves failing, not reaching what the moral law demands, and therefore we will be humble. So remember that for Kant, there's always this distinction between the homo phenomenon and the homo noumenon. If you want that explained in more detail, check out my lecture on the apperception and the self-consciousness. And also, if you want to go into more detail on the practical implications of it, check out my lecture on human dignity. But basically, the homo phenomenon, the appearing human being, that is the individual that appears in the sensual world, like me or you or anyone else. And the homo noumenon is the intelligible humanity, the human being that doesn't appear in the sensual world as an individual, but rather that can only be thought of. And that humanity, that quality of being human, being a rational and autonomous free being, that we all share. Clearly, it is this homo noumenon which is also the aforementioned ideal of the God-pleasing humanity that we should live up to. And that, if you believe in that, may have been realized in Jesus of Nazareth. So basically what Kant is saying is that I, this individual, as a homo phenomenon, should not compare myself with other homo phenomenon. Sure, he could be a better person than me in his empirical character, but I don't know his will. I don't know if his appearing virtue comes from a true goodwill, or maybe just from lucky coincidences, from his temperament, from his education, and so on. I talked about this in the lecture on goodwill and good deeds, that to Kant only the will matters, and that can only really be known by God. And B, even if I did know that that other person also has a better will than me, I could still also start having such a good will. So as a homo phenomenon, I should not compare myself to another homo phenomenon. Rather, I should compare myself with myself in a way. I should compare myself as a homo phenomenon with myself as a homo noumenon. I should compare my sensuality, the person I happen to be, the person I appear as, with my supersensuality, my intelligibility, the person I should be, the person I should live up to. And incidentally, this, what Kant says here, and this form of humility is exactly the opposite of what today's Ausklärung and Twilight Man, so the Pseudo-Aufklärung, the Pseudo-Enlightenment, teaches. Because the Ausgeklärt humanists, on the one hand, think they are good enough. They're always very self-righteous, precisely because they believe in a lenient moral law, and they therefore always reach whatever their morality demands of them, because it doesn't really demand anything. But on the other hand, they will stress that they have humility and that humility is important in relation to other people. They will stress that they don't think of themselves as being better than other central individuals. And they will get very angry and very much attack you if they feel that you think you're better than others, especially if they feel that you think you're better than them. But, I mean, wisdom should be, amongst other things at least, about knowing yourself. The wise person should know himself, and so therefore the wise person should know that he's wise, right? A fool may not realize that he's a fool, and that is part of his foolishness, but you cannot be wise really without realizing it. And if you realize it, why should you not be allowed to say it or to feel like it? Of course, you can, in certain cases, feel better than other people and be justified in doing so. I don't see living amongst slaveholders, climate destroyers, Nazis. I don't see why I shouldn't feel better morally than many of my fellow citizens, and why I shouldn't feel like someone living in inner exile amongst the Nazis. But the point is that this is no grounds for self-righteousness. This is not something you can applaud yourself for, being better than your fellow human beings or than some of them. Because this comparison is always a relative one. But you need to do an absolute comparison. You need an absolute measurement. That is, you need an ideal that tells you this is what you should strive for. And now you can see how close you come or how far away from it you are. You cannot just compare yourself with others who should also strive for that same ideal, right? Imagine a school class, and imagine they have some exam, and everyone else gets an F, and you get an E. Then sure, if you compare yourself with the others in your class, you can feel good about yourself. You can say, oh, I'm the best, I'm the smartest in my class. But I mean, you still failed the exam, you still got just an E. If you think of the ideal, like what is the ideal student? How should a student be? What grade should I get? How should I write my exam? Then of course the ideal would be to write an A. And if you compare yourself not to your fellow classmates, who maybe fell even shorter of the ideal than you did, sure. But if you rather compare yourself with the ideal as such, rather than looking left and right, whether others reach that ideal or not, then you will still be very humble, and then you will not feel good about the grade you got. Kant does not want the moral law and this ideal of holiness to make us despise ourselves as not being good enough. Quite the contrary, he wants it to motivate us, to fill us with determination. And he believes that it can. That precisely if we follow rigorism in morality, precisely if we imagine the moral law as demanding holiness, that is, if we imagine it as something sublime, something with its own dignity, something worthy of reverence and admiration, then this can motivate us to want to try our best to follow that law, to also be worthy of this reverence and admiration. While on the other hand, if you make the law too easy, if you make a morality that doesn't demand much, that tries to entice and lure people into being moral, not by saying this is the sublime moral law, and if you want to be worth anything, if you want to have any dignity, you must follow it, but rather by saying, oh, following the moral law is not so hard, and anyways, it's good for yourself. Doing what is good will also make you happy. It's actually to your own benefit if you think about it, to not be so selfish. Then this does not really make people more moral. While we may think that it will benefit morality, that it will attract more people to morality, it actually does the opposite, because here morality is grounded on an immoral, on a selfish will. Here we are basically telling people it is okay to only want your own benefit. It is okay to be prudent, to live a life that is about your own happiness. We are just telling them that their happiness, that the most prudent course of action is also what benefits others. But what if that is one day not the case? What if one day they find that they are in a situation where the most prudent course of action that leads to their own happiness is actually the one that harms others? Since we already told them it's not about being good per se, being good is just a means to an end, but it is the end of your own happiness that matters. Well, if that means doesn't lead to that end one day, why should they still use that means? But this is something I will come back to at a much later point when I talk about Kant's pedagogy and about what Kant says about raising children into moral people, how you can do that. Instead, I want to once again address the criticism of Kant's rigorism. As I said, they say Kant demands too much. His morality is fit for angels, not for human beings. To Kant, it's just black and white, and his whiteness is too white, it's too pure. No one can be as good as Kant demands human beings to be. And this is a criticism that is not just wrong, it's completely absurd. Because morality, sure, those people, they will say, oh, isn't it enough to just be decent, to just be friendly? We cannot be holy, so why strive for holiness? But a morality cannot be too good. I mean, that is what good means, right? Good is good. You cannot be better than good. I mean, better than good would be better, right? And the best is the best, and there's nothing that comes beyond the best. So the true goodness is that which is best, that which is perfect. And saying morality is too good, it's like saying a circle that you draw is too round, is too circular. It's just absurd. To Kant, the idea of goodness, or this ideal of holiness, serves exactly the purpose that all ideas serve. I talked about this way earlier in my lecture on what is reason to Kant, because reason is the faculty of ideas. And in the philosophical language, an idea is not just something we come up with, like in everyday language. Rather, to Kant, the idea is a concept of reason, of something supersensual that is a maximum, and precisely for that reason cannot ever be experienced in the sensual world. Um, like goodness, like wisdom, like justice. And these ideas, as I explained in my previous lecture on reason, these ideas have a twofold practical function to Kant. They serve as examples, and they serve as examples both of creation and of judgment. So let's actually go as an example with geometry. In your head, you imagine a circle, a true, perfect, mathematical circle, 360 degrees, completely round, no edges, no corners. Now you try to draw a circle. This circle you imagine first serves as your example of creation. That is, you use it as a prototype, after which you draw the actual circle on your paper. And you try to make what you draw look as close, as similar to the circle you're imagining as possible. And then afterward, that same imagined circle will serve as an example now not of creation, but of judgment. That is, you will look at the circle you drew and you will compare it with the circle in your head and see how close it came to it. And maybe one person is not so good at drawing, is not so sure of hand, so when he tried to draw a circle, what came out looks maybe closer to an egg, is maybe more elliptical. And maybe another person can actually draw very well and drew an almost perfect circle. But in order to judge how perfect or how imperfect that circle is that you drew, you must first imagine the perfect circle in your head and compare it with that image. And I mean, no one can actually draw a fully perfect circle. Maybe it will look perfect to the naked eye, but if you were to zoom in, if you were to look more closely, there would probably still be slight imperfections. It would probably still be slightly elliptical and not perfectly circular. But in order to make it as perfect as possible, and I mean, you don't know beforehand how well you will be able to draw it, right? You need to compare it with that image of the perfect circle. Same with other things in geometry, right? If you try to draw a straight line, you will probably not be able to make it truly perfectly straight, especially if you draw it just by hand without a ruler as help. But in order to draw something that comes anywhere close to a straight line, you first need to imagine what a perfectly straight line is and then try to come as close as possible to that. And in order to afterwards judge how close you came, you still need to imagine the perfectly straight line. And the same is true for morality, Kant says. We need this idea of true goodness, of holiness, first as an example of creation, that is, of creating our own character, creating our own actions. Once again, we can ask ourselves, for example, what would Jesus do? And we can try to get as close to it as possible. Like I can, maybe someone does something that offends me in a way and I can get angry, but before screaming at him, before insulting him back, before saying something that I know is a low blow, I know will hurt him. I can tell myself, wait, the perfect, holy person, the one who is truly good, would not do that. So I will strive to come close to how I think the perfect humanity should be. And then afterward, that same idea of goodness serves as an example of judgment. That is, I compare my own actions, or I compare another person's actions with my ideal. And I ask, how close did it come to that? And here you can see that those people who reject Kant's morality on the grounds of its rigorism, that they self-contradict even. When they are saying, oh, this morality is too much, it is too good, actual human beings in the world cannot be as good, they are not holy, they are not perfect, I ask them, how do you know? How can you even make this judgment that humans are imperfect, that humans aren't holy, unless you have in your own head this ideal of a perfect human being, of a holy human being, and you compare the actual humans that you find in this world, yourself and others, with that ideal, and then see that they come short of that ideal. If you didn't have this ideal for judging, then you would not be able to say humans are imperfect. You can only judge something to be imperfect if you know what perfection would mean. And then see that it doesn't fit the criteria for perfection. Kant, there's a difference between the science of morality and the art of morality. The science of morality would say what is moral based on rational considerations, and the art of morality would try to enact this, to bring this into life, right? This is close to the more general distinction Fichte later made of philosophy as being the science of reason or the art of reason. And I, as a philosopher, for example, consider myself an artist of reason. I want to work on bringing what the science, what someone like Kant, for example, found into life and actually shaping life according to it. Kant also called it the moral dogmatics and the moral aesthetics. But the issue with these words is, of course, that today they have other connotations. When people hear dogmatics today, they think of something that is simply believed without argument, unquestionably, blindly. This is not what Kant means. The dogmatics is basically just the teachings to him. He still uses the word dogma, which is basically, if you go with the Greek, just an opinion or a teaching. He still uses it in a fairly neutral way. The word per se doesn't say anything to him about whether the dogma is well justified, whether you have good reasons to believe in it or not. And on the other hand, when people hear aesthetics nowadays, they will usually think of someone abstaining from things, right? Denying himself the pleasures of the flesh, fasting, living in celibacy. But really, once again, if you go back to the Greek, aesthetics just means working on yourself, cultivating yourself. So sure, you could do that by abstaining, but that would just be one version of aesthetics. There could be any number of things that you do to yourself to shape yourself. So why this is important is because Kant says we need to first work on the science of morality or on the dogmatics, and here we just need to ask our reason, what should be done, what should happen, how should a human be, what is the ideal, and it is the ideal of holiness. And then afterwards comes the art of morality, comes the aesthetics, comes us trying to live up to this and to come as close to this as possible. But what we mustn't do under any circumstances is mix them up, is when we are still working on the dogmatics, already thinking of the aesthetics and, so to say, lowering the standards, making it easier, making the moral law into something that doesn't demand much so that it will afterwards be easier to actually follow it. That we mustn't do. I mean, go back to the example of geometry. You should first do pure mathematics. Think about what is a perfect circle or what is a perfectly straight line. And then you can try to draw it. And then you can work on your drawing, right? You can try to get better at drawing, to make your circles more circular, to make your lines more straight over time. But if when you're still doing mathematics, you're already thinking of drawing it and of making the drawing as easy as possible. So if you're already thinking of the execution, so to say, then of course you will not imagine a perfect circle or a perfect line to begin with, because you will say, oh, that's too much, that's I can never draw that, perfectly. But then if you had imagined a perfectly circular circle, what you would have drawn, trying to get close to it as possible, would probably not have been perfect. It would probably still have been a little elliptical, but it would have been as close as you can get with your abilities. While if you, from the beginning, imagine the circle as imperfect, imagine more of an egg than a real circle, then what you will draw, trying to reach it, will be even more imperfect and will not be the best you could have done, maybe. We could also once again go with the example of school and grades. If a student is told you should strive for an A, then maybe he will study hard and do his best in the exam, and maybe it will not be enough for an A, but maybe he will get a B because of that. But if he tells himself right away, oh, an A is too much to aim for, I cannot get an A anyways, an A is that's an ideal not for mere mortals, for normal humans, that is for super smart people only, I cannot reach an A, then he will not try his best in the first place. He will not learn hard to get an A when he tells himself it's not possible anyways. He will maybe just look over his notes once, and then go into the exam, and he will not only not get an A, he will not even get a B. He will maybe get a C or a D. And that is the point to Kant. He would agree that yes, we will never be perfectly holy. That is, we will never live up to our own ideal, to be sure. But we should still strive for it. There will always remain an abyss between me, the way I am, and me, how I should be, between me as a homo phenomenon and the ideal of the God-pleasing holy humanity, to be sure. But no one can say a priori how wide or how small that abyss may be. If I try to climb up impossibly high stairs and try to get as high as possible, then I will get as high as possible. I will only stop once I really can't go on anymore, once I really break down. But if I tell myself, oh, I can't do it anyways, I can't reach the top, yes, okay, that much may be correct, but then I will stop somewhere, and maybe I could not have reached the top, but if I had tried, maybe I could have went one step further, or two, or three even, right? Um, Imagine you want to run a marathon. Maybe you will indeed not manage to run a whole marathon. Maybe you will be exhausted after half the way. But you will try, you will train for it, you will do your best to get as far as possible. If you tell yourself right away, oh, I can't run a marathon, I'm not fit enough for that, then maybe you will give up after not half, but after a quarter of the way. Even though, if you had really pushed yourself to run the whole thing, you could at least have done the half. And that is why it is so important to have moral rigorism in the science of morality, in the dogmatics, in the actual moral law, in the actual ideal of holiness that we should strive for. Because we don't know how close we may get to it. That is why it is itself the highest moral duty, according to Kant, to envision the moral law and to talk about the moral law as being as perfect and as demanding as much as possible. And there can be no greater crime than corrupting the moral law itself, claiming it actually doesn't demand that much from you. Because any other crime, just not reaching the demand of the law, just falling short, that is something you can work on if you believe that the law demands more. But telling yourself the law doesn't demand more is something that, unless you change your mind on that, prevents you from ever working on becoming more moral, right? You can think back on my lecture on the radical evil, where I described the three kinds of evil that Kant identifies. And if you think back on the first two, there was the frailty of the human heart, where we find that we don't follow the moral law, but rather follow our essential desires. And there was the impurity of the moral of the human heart, where we might even follow the letter of the law, where we might do legal actions, but not out of pure reverence for the law, not because we simply have the goodwill to follow the moral law, but rather we allow ourselves to do what is good out of the wrong reasons, out of sensual drives, at least in part. These, as long as I admit them to myself, I can work on. I can try being better next time. But the third, the perversity or corruption of the human heart, where I give myself a non-moral maxim to follow, and then maybe lie to myself, telling myself that this is okay, that this is what morality allows or even demands. If I do that, then once again, as long as I don't change, as long as I don't become more honest with myself, I cannot possibly work on myself and become a better person, because I just told myself that I don't have to. So with that, we can clearly see that the criticism of Kant's rigorism is dishonest, and that people criticize it not because they theoretically have some arguments against it, they in theory found it to be wrong, but rather they criticize it for practical reasons. They criticize it not because it's wrong, but because they don't want it. What they are saying is basically morality should be there for the human being, not the human being should be there for morality. That is, there shouldn't be a moral ideal that we have to strive towards, that we have to try to come as close to as possible, but rather the moral law should get down to our level. The moral law should get as close to us as possible, should demand only what we can fulfill or what we are already doing anyways. So the human being should not fit himself to the demands of morality, should not shape himself to come closer to the ideal, but rather morality should be shaped to be fitting for the human being as he is. So with their criticism, no matter what sophistical arguments they hide behind, what they really want is to find an excuse for their own patheticness and unworthiness. They want a morality that is not rigoristic, that lets them be as immoral as they are. And they may claim that this morality of Kant's doesn't work, it demands too much, it asks too much of the human being. So they say this cannot be the ought, you ought to do this, because we are not able to do this. We cannot do it. But what is this can? It is really a want. They are really talking about their own whims, their own desires. Really, it is just a case that they don't want to do it. They don't want to try to be this good. So the way they work in their, let's say, moral philosophy is they start from the factual, from what do I want, what are my desires, and then they find, okay, I don't want to be good, and from that they conclude I cannot be good, which would only be true if they didn't have free will, right? If I don't have free will, then I can only want what I want, and if I don't want something, then I cannot do it. But if I am free, then I can change what I want. So they say we don't want to be fully good, we don't want to be holy, therefore it follows that we cannot, and therefore it follows that we ought not, that this is not our duty, because it cannot be, it would be unjust for something to be our duty which we cannot possibly do, which we cannot possibly fulfill. But this is not how you do moral philosophy. Moral philosophy is done precisely the other way around. You start by asking, what ought I to do? What is my duty? What does my own reason tell me? What is the ideal of humanity that I should live up to? And then second, you conclude from that, since I ought to do this, I can. It would not make sense otherwise. I cannot have a duty to do something which I cannot possibly do. So since my reason tells me that I should do this, I must also conclude and believe that I can do this. I talked about this in the lecture on do we have free will? That is Kant's argument, right? An ought implies a can. If we find that we have a moral duty, we find with that we must have free will. And then last comes what I want. Last, I say, since I ought to do this, and since from that it follows that I can do this, now it follows that I must do it no matter what I want, no matter if I like doing it or if I desire something else. That is how morality works, not the other way around, as the critics of Kant go, saying, I don't want to do what's good, therefore I can't, therefore I don't ought to do it. That is dishonest. That is intellectually dishonest. But is the claim that we cannot live up to this ideal of holiness even true? Even if it was true, how would you know that it is true? How would you know that no human being can be perfectly moral? Can you know this a priori? So does reason say this? Or do you know it just a posteriori? That is, do you know it from experience? Are you basically saying, well, I don't know, not personally, not from any information I have, not from the history of the past. I don't know of anyone who was ever perfectly holy. This latter thing might be true. Maybe no holy person has lived so far, but that doesn't necessarily mean that no one can be holy, right? It just means that no one was. Maybe everyone so far was evil. Um, in every, I mean, if we don't think about it in general, being holy in general, but if we focus rather on specific cases, if we go through our lives moment by moment, then we have to say in every single moment where a moral question arises, in any moment where I have to make a choice and I can choose to act morally or immorally, um, in every single moment, I have to think of myself as being free. Again, I talked about this in the lecture on free will. If in this moment the moral law in me tells me you ought to do this and you ought to not do this, and if afterward my conscience tells me what you did there was wrong, you should not have done this, then this implies that in this one singular moment I had the freedom to act differently, to choose something else. And that I will find in every moment where the moral law speaks to me. Because otherwise, if I wasn't free, it would be silent. If it speaks to me, that implies that I have the freedom to listen and to follow it. So in every singular instance, I find that I can be good. Maybe I am not, but I could be. And if could be good in every instance, in every singular instance, then I could also be good in all of them together, theoretically. Maybe I never will be, but it is not a priori impossible. But still, of course, it is a cliche almost to say, no, no one can be fully good, no one is perfect, we all do bad things sometimes. And to be sure, whoever were to disagree with that would probably just get ridiculed. But most of the time, when people criticize Kant and his moral philosophy, saying he demands too much, he is too black and white, saying people must be perfect or else they are evil, and it's not possible to be this perfect. Usually, this criticism is just based on misunderstandings, on people not really understanding what Kant is talking about. Kant distinguishes between what he calls at some point the virtue phenomenon, that is the appearing virtue, the virtue that someone actually exhibits in the sensual world, and the virtue noumenon, that is the virtue that can only be sought, that someone has truly in the intelligible world, the goodwill that someone has. Kant distinguishes between what he calls someone's empirical character and his intelligible character. And I already talked about this in the lecture on the goodwill and the good deed. I said that you can have legality of action according to Kant without having morality of character or of attitude. So someone can have a good empirical character, that is, he can be decent, friendly, well-mannered, helpful, because he also has a good intelligible character, because he actually has a good will. But someone could have a similar good empirical character, while his intelligible character is maybe bad, is maybe completely rotten. Maybe he doesn't have a good will, he doesn't have a good maxim, Maybe his maxim is just I do whatever I like, but it just so happens that he likes to be friendly. Maybe it's just his temperament, it's just experiences he made in his life, it's just the way he was raised. Just so happens that he has compassionate, empathetic drives, and that leads to a good empirical character. But if his intelligible character, if his will, if his maxims stayed the same, but everything else was changed. He suddenly had different drives, different desires. He had a different biography or whatever. He could maybe do the most evil, the most vile actions. I mean, we can often see in the actual world how people who, in some cases, may have a good empirical character, are capable in other cases of doing completely evil actions, right? Think of certain soldiers and war criminals. I mean, they are usually not monsters all of the time. There were Nazis, there were people in the SS who were perfectly capable of spending a nice Christmas Eve with their children and then going back to murdering the Jews, right? Just like nowadays, there are soldiers in the IGF who are probably nice people if you go out having a drink with them. And then go into Gaza and shoot little kids in the head and put themselves celebrating the destruction they're doing there on TikTok or whatever. So the good empirical character, if it doesn't come from a truly good intelligible character, can easily in another situation turn into a bad empirical character. Well, and what does that mean for Kant's morality? Things are indeed black and white for Kant, but only when it comes to the intelligible character. So only if we consider the supersensual world. Because here there's only A or non-A, good or evil. Because this is about a decision of your will. This is about what is the principle according to which you want to act. And I said in the last lecture, is Kant's morality too strict? I said that there are only two principles. Either your principle is fiat justitia et pereat mundus, let there be justice even if the world perish, so I'm willing to sacrifice my benefit for what is right, or your principle is the opposite. Fiat mundus et pereat justitia. I am willing to sacrifice justice for my personal benefit. This is good or evil. There is no in between. There is no middle ground here. Because the intelligible character depends on your mode of thinking, while the empirical character is about what Kant calls the mode of sense, about your sensuality, your temperament, your desires that you have, and so on. And thinking is an act. It's a singular act. I make this decision. This is my will. This is what I want to do. Period. I'm done with it. There is no, if you only consider the intelligible world, there is no time, right? This I discussed in my lecture on sensuality and on time and space as forms of viewing. Kant says that we view everything that affects us. That is, we view all our sensations in time and space, time being the form of viewing of our inner sense. So even our own thoughts and feelings and so on, we view in time. But the things in themselves, including myself as an intelligible being, including myself as a rational being, are not in time. So therefore, the thinking as such is just a singular act, singular decision. executing, enacting what I decided. So I made the decision I want to be good. Actually realizing that in the sensual world, that is a process. But a process requires time, and therefore only in the sensual world there can be processes. So what that means is that the intelligible character is black or white. Either you make the decision, I want to be good, I want to follow the moral law, or you make the decision, I don't want to be good, I want to rather follow my drives. There is no third, there is no middle ground. But in our empirical character, so the way we appear as individuals here in the sensual world, there can be degrees of goodness. There's not just black and white, or there's no black and white at all. There's no person that will appear as completely evil, devilish, monstrous, and there's no person that will appear as completely holy and angel-like. But rather there are degrees, or in the language of our day, there are shades of gray. Maybe to make this a bit more clear, let's consider some non-moral examples. Let's say someone makes the decision to undress. Now, in that very moment where he said, I want to get naked now, he's not naked yet. And getting naked, undressing, is a process that takes some time. And how much time it takes, how difficult it is, depends on what you were wearing. Maybe you just had your underwear on and it just takes a second to slip it off and you're already naked. And maybe someone else was dressed in countless layers of clothes with lots of zips and lots of buttons, and it takes time to peel out of all of that. So empirically, the way they appear in the sensual world, one of them will get naked faster. But if we just consider their will, they are completely equal. Both have the same will to undress. And if it is really will, I said in the lecture on goodwill that to Kant, will is not the same as intention or an empty wish. To Kant, a true will will always lead to action. If I truly want something, I will always try to realize it. So if they both truly have the will to undress, then in the intelligible world, we can look at them, we can judge them as if they had truly undressed, right? Even if the one with more clothes on were to be stopped in the middle of undressing, even if someone would shoot him in the head and he would die before he managed to get naked, we could still judge him as if he had gotten naked, because in his will he was already naked. Basically, it was just a matter of time to realize this will in the world. Likewise, if you decide to go to the gym and to lift weights from now on, of course you will not in an instant grow muscles. Of course this will take days and weeks and months, but if this is truly your will, again, I'm not talking about an empty intention, oh, I should go to the gym and then maybe I go once or twice and then I don't go for the rest of the year but still pay for it. No, I mean a true will. If this is truly your will that you will stick to, then empirically your body may not have changed yet, but in the intelligible world we can judge you as if you already had developed those apps, because it's now just a matter of time. And this is why Kant is saying a bad person turning into a good person in the sensual world can only happen as a matter of slow reform, and will probably take a lifetime or longer than that, will probably not be concluded within your lifetime. But in the supersensual world, it can only be a sudden revolution, Kant says. We cannot, he says, we aren't able to do immediately whatever we want. Again, just because I want to have strength, or just because I want to play an instrument or speak a new language, I cannot automatically do it. It takes time to work on ourselves, to shape our sensuality, both our body and our psyche. But in order to even do so, in order to even start that process, there needs to be a true decision and true determination. And that does not take time. That is something that happens in an instant. That is a singular act, which is well described, Kant would say, in this Christic image that we need to die in the flesh and be reborn in the spirit. This is precisely why Kant talks of a philosophical rebirth. I discussed that in the lecture on character, that we should have character. How Kant says character is not something that we can get to over time, because having character is about being principled. You cannot be a little principled and then a little more principled. You either are or you aren't. And Kant says it should be a solemn act, it should be a special occasion, and that is what he calls the philosophical rebirth, because it makes us a new person, where we decide from now on, I want to have a character. And he does say we should take this seriously and not lightly, because if we do that once or twice or thrice and then always end up not being principled after all, not having character, then we will lose all trust in ourselves and all self-respect. But still, even if we do it seriously, that does not mean that we will immediately succeed at always acting with character, at always acting principled. No, that may, even after our philosophical rebirth, still take time, but that is just in the sensual world now. I mean, just like the physical birth, once we are born, sure, we are not a full-grown adult human being yet. It takes time, it takes many years to get there. But once we are born, once we are in this world, the process is underway. Unless it's somehow interrupted, unless we die prematurely, it is now certain that we will turn into an adult, which is why, in a certain sense, we can already be considered a full human being, right? This is precisely why we should have moral relevance even for babies. I mean, they are not factually rational beings yet, but we know that they have this potential, that they will turn into rational beings if we just let them be. Unfortunately, I find that many people have very little sense, both in others and in themselves, for true will, for a true decision, a true act of the will. They also usually can't tell apart what is a decision and what is a mere choice, which follows from our basic decisions. And they can't tell apart what is a real will and what is a mere intention. But it is something very different, and the will, the true decision, is something much deeper. I'm reminded of a girl I know, who I've known for years, and when I first met her, she was at a very bad place in life, and she was self-harming. And I helped her with that, and after talking to her for about 3 months, she told me that she wanted to stop self-harming. She wanted to get better now. And it was very striking to me, and it's something that I still remember very vividly, because of the way she said it, which is something that I cannot really express here. But there was something in the way she said this which was very serious. It was not just a mere intention, it was not an empty wish. I mean, surely many people who self harm will probably at many points say, "Oh, I want to stop," and then a week later, or maybe even the next day already, they do it again. Um, this was not it. I could feel in a way that this had a seriousness to it, the way she said it. So I knew that here she had made a real decision to stop. She had changed her character, her intelligible character. But what is important and why I'm mentioning this is that she didn't immediately change her empirical character. This was, in fact, not the moment when she stopped cutting herself. She did it 2 or 3 more times in the following month. So if you were superficial, you could say, okay, that means she didn't really decide it then. She had the intention then, but she didn't really go through with it, and she only decided it later because she did it 2 or 3 more times before she really stopped, and now she hasn't done it for years. And now she's at a completely different and much happier place in life, and I'm pretty certain that even if something bad happened now, even fate was somehow cruel to her, she would not fall back into self-harm. She would deal with it in healthier ways, I think. But I would say that no, she did indeed decide. Again, she changed her intelligible character in that moment. It just took a little time for her to change her empirical character based on that. Yes, she did cut 2 or 3 more times, but this was the moment when she really decided to stop and when she really started working on stopping. And from that on, it became less frequent till soon afterwards she stopped altogether. Maybe it helps to explain what Kant is on about with an analogy. Say you take a block of ice and you put it into a pot on a hearth which is already heated to 100 degrees. Then, of course, the ice will not just in one instant turn into fluid water or just in one instant evaporate into steam. This will take a little time for it to melt down to water first, and then for the water to start boiling, and then for steam to arise. And it will take probably quite some time before there's no water left at all. But the process starts here. If it already is heated to 100 degrees, then in the empirical world, there is this process, and you would have, when you look at it, to judge that this is still a block of ice right now and not water or steam. But if you don't look at it empirically, so under the condition of time, you could consider this as if it was already steam. Because as long as no one interferes, like as long as no one turns off the heat or whatever, it is now certain to eventually turn into steam. What does the time matter? What does this eventually matter, as long as it is sure to happen? And so you could compare two pots. Let's say in the one pot there's a block of ice, and in the other there's already liquid water. If the state, the aggregate of the water, is it ice, is it water, is it steam, if that is the empirical character of the person in our analogy, then you could say, okay, the second pot has a better empirical character. it's more liquid than the first. But if the heat of the hearth, of the oven, is the intelligible character, and if, say, the first one is already heated to 100 degrees, and the second one is turned off completely, then you would have to judge that the first one is a better human being than the second one. Not in the way they appear in the world right now, not in the intelligible world. There, the second one acts more decently, with more friendliness and so on, maybe. But in their basic decision of what kind of people they will be. And it is now only a matter of time, maybe of long time. Maybe someone's empirical character changing will, in some cases, when it's a very bad character, when it's a very stubborn character, will maybe take very long. And maybe that person will make very small steps, so small that for years other people around them almost don't see them changing for the better at all. But still, if under the one pot, the pot with the ice, the plate is turned on to 100 degrees, it is now only a matter of time for it to melt down and eventually to evaporate. So that means that if we imagine God, who can look at the hearts of people, I mean, we only see people's empirical character. We don't see their intelligible character, not even our own. I talked about this in the lecture on the good will and the good deed, and I said that this is exactly why Kant says we can judge morally in the sense of the German word urteilen, that is, we can judge was this action in accordance with the moral law or not, but we cannot judge in the sense of richten, that is, judge like a judge does, that is, we cannot say you are guilty, you must be punished. Only God can do this. So the thing is, we only see the empirical character. But if there is an all-knowing God, then of course he can look into people's hearts. And that is why to us there are shades of gray. Because to us, someone getting better is a process, a long process, and no one is just good or just bad. But to God, there is black and white. And that is also why it is not unjust for God to put people into heaven or hell. I mean, people have said that this is too extreme, that this is not justified, that no one is so bad, so evil that he would deserve eternal suffering, or no one has been so good, so pure that he would deserve eternal bliss. Things are not just black and white. There are many people who are in between who would neither deserve hell nor heaven. But this, I think, is only true if you judge people only by their empirical character. But if God judges by the intelligible character, by the true will, not by how much the will managed to already realize itself and appear, but by the will, then he would be very much justified to just say you go to hell and you go to heaven. And he would even be justified to put some people into hell who outwardly appear to be much better people than some others who go to heaven. And the only way to judge the will empirically, to be sure or somewhat sure that someone has a good will, Kant would say, is if that person throughout his life constantly gets better, right? Let's go back to the analogy. How would I know that my hearth is turned on? By seeing that the block of ice, no matter how slowly, constantly melts, and that the water eventually starts boiling. That is how I know it gets warmer and warmer. If at any point the water stopped if it stopped melting, then I would know that the hearth is not really turned on. Or even if it got colder again, right? If the water turned into ice, I would know, okay, clearly it's not warming up, it's getting colder. So Kant says only if we constantly get better in our empirical character can we be somewhat assured that our intelligible character already is good. Not if it's an up and down, not if we live a life that is a moral roller coaster. Like maybe I have one moment where I'm very much affected by seeing someone suffer and feel compassion, and I say, oh, I want to be better now, I want to help more. But then some days later, I forget about that again, and I get worse again. If it's an up and down, then I know that even in the moments that I go up, that I get better, I'm not truly better in my will. It's just my empirical character getting better for a time because I have been affected in a certain manner. No, only if I constantly get better. No matter how slowly, but I must get better. I must never fall back. Only then could I really have a good empirical character. Could I really have a good intelligible character? But this, once again, is all that would matter for God. Maybe my life ends before I become truly holy. Maybe I cannot become truly holy in one lifetime. Maybe one lifetime is too little. But if I constantly got better, then that would mean that if my life was extended into eternity, with my will staying the same, my decision to be good not changing, then at least in eternity, I would reach that ideal of the God-pleasing humanity. Then at least in eternity, I would become as good, as holy as Jesus, so to say. And since God is outside of sensuality and therefore outside of time, since God does not judge us by a specific empirical moment, like how good was my empirical character at the random moment of my death. I mean, death is random, right? It's largely a matter of coincidence. If I die a little earlier, maybe there's an accident, a car runs me over. It would not be just to throw me into hell just because I was run over by a car at a time where I wasn't that good yet. If I would certainly have become a much better person if I had had a few more decades to live. But to God, since there is no time to him, he can judge eternity as already being over. So he can judge us by the end result that we would have reached if time had been eternal. And here Kant is once more, as I've been pointing out in several previous lectures, in agreement with Jesus. Because Jesus in the Bible says, therefore take no thought, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For after all these things do the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knows that ye have need of all these things. But seek ye first the kingdom of God, and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. So he's not saying that you have to actually be as holy as him in the way you appear empirically, right? He's saying you have to strive for it. And the striving is already enough. It's not about reaching. Maybe your time is not enough to reach it. Maybe it would take eternity to actually reach it. But God has eternity. For him, eternity is like the blink of an eye. So God will judge you not by what you reached, what you accomplished, but what you were striving for. If it is a real striving. Again, not empty wishes or whatever. But this is precisely why to Kant there is not much value in just working on your specific vices. Maybe working on them and actually accomplishing getting rid of them, but that will not make you a better person. Like let's say you're someone who, by his temperament, is very choleric, is very aggressive, easily agitated, easily angry. Let's say you constantly lose your shit and scream at people, or even attack people, beat people up. Of course, you can go to some anti-aggression training. Of course, you can get therapy, get some coaching for your anger issues. And maybe you will even manage to become a calmer person, which will probably both benefit you and the people around you. But still, that doesn't mean that you have become a more moral person. Even though you're not screaming at people anymore or beating anyone up anymore, you are not morally better. You just made your empirical character better, not your intelligible character. And working on your empirical character like that can be a manner of prudence. And then we are back with ancient morality, right? Then we are back at the morality of the Epicureans, who would say, lead a prudent life, do what makes you happy. You are not happy if you constantly get angry, and you are happier if you manage to be more calm. And who say, being prudent will also make you more virtuous. You will also treat others better if you do whatever makes you happy. And this might even all be correct, but it has nothing to do with actual morality. It is just about prudence, not about morality. No, Kant says, before trying to improve our mores, our specific actions, we should first try to improve our character, our will. We should first want what is good, and then, from wanting what is truly good, not wanting what benefits us, not wanting what makes us happy, from wanting what is truly good, from that we should start to turn our empirical character into being a better person. Once more, I point you back to my lecture on radical evil, where I said that basically the true root for evilness is deceit, to Kant, is our ability to lie to ourselves about our morality and about the moral law. And that is an act. That is a singular act. That's not a process. Either I am honest with myself or I'm not. Everything else can take time, but can be worked on. So if I lie to myself, if I'm not a rigorist, but rather a latitudinarist, if I tell myself, oh, the moral law is lenient, the moral law is indulgent, it allows for me to not be perfect, then I can be as decent, as friendly a person as anyone else. I'm still at the core evil, and I'm still incapable, living with this decision, to truly improve, because I'm telling myself I'm already fine as I am. On the other hand, if I make the decision from now on to be honest with myself, from now on to be a moral rigorist, to say the moral law demands holiness from you, and I'm never good enough as long as I'm not fully holy. And if we start to judge all our actions according to this ideal of holiness, then no matter how bad our actions are, we will try to improve them over time. And that means that at our core, at our root, we are now a good person. So, once again, that is how we must understand Kant's rigorism. Rigorism is mostly about the intelligible character. Here we have black and white. In the way the will appears, in the way the will realizes itself in the sensual world, there are shades of gray, there are degrees, and there's a process of improving, of becoming a better person. But in the intelligible world, it's just a singular decision. My deep thanks be to my supporters, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.